So here's a story from my Megan McKenna Lent book. Once upon a time, there were 3 young men, and they wanted to study with a famous teacher, a famous rabbi. But he lived very far away, so they tried to follow him and, read about him, but it wasn't the same as studying with him. But they didn't have any money to go there. They determined, because they were best friends, that whatever happened, they would do it together. So one of them came up with an idea. It was not a good idea, but this was his idea. He said, let's pretend we're teachers. We'll pretend we're rabbis. We'll go from village to village, and you know how our people are. They'll support us. They'll put us up for the night and give us food. And when we're done, we'll get to the rabbi. Well, the other 2 didn't really like that idea, felt a little guilty about it, but they all solemnly swore that this was the only way they could do it, and that they would come back to the villages that helped them and give them all the knowledge that they acquired from their learning. So they set off. And it was so much easier than they thought it would be. People were great. They welcomed them. They'd kind of go into a village and say, well, we're traveling rabbis. And they'd be, oh, well, please come stay with us. And they'd get a place for the night, and they'd get a nice meal, and they'd even get food for the journey. It was going great. Until one day they came to a village, same basic setup, They said, well, we're traveling rabbis, and someone took them in. But then as they were just settling in for the night, there was a pounding on the door. And a man came in, the mayor of the town, frantic. And he came up to the young men and he said, rabbis, will one of you please come and pray with my daughter? She's dying. Will you lay hands on her? Will you beg the Holy One for mercy on our behalf? Well, they were terrified. And they thought, this is it. We're going to get called out as nobodies. This is it. They weren't sure what to do. They were frozen in their panic. Until the one who had the idea said, I will go and pray. And he did. He was gone for a long time. And they were getting more and more anxious. And when he got back, he was completely shaken. He said, I don't think she's going to make it. And so they caught a few hours of sleep, and they left before dawn. Just in case she died, they did not want to be caught out, They wanted to be as far away as they possibly could. After this, they were humbled and a little less sure of themselves, but they finally made it to their teacher, and they spent months and months learning from him. It was extraordinary. It was a wonderful experience. And at the end, when they were ready to leave, the rabbi called them together, and he said, look, you need to go back to every one of those villages and apologize and tell them the truth, because now you are teachers, you are rabbis, you cannot lie. You must stand for the truth. And they knew he was right. And so they started working their way back. And they would approach a village, and again, so much easier than they thought. Nobody cared. They just were glad that they came, and they gave them hospitality again and celebrated their learning. Until they got to the village with the sick girl. And they were pretty scared. They didn't know what was going to happen. And they walked into the village and they heard a commotion. There was like a buzz. They knew it was about them. And they saw from far off the mayor running wildly with his arms flailing. And he fell upon the young man who had prayed. And he wept. And he blessed him. And he thanked him because the girl had lived. And they started to apologize and to tell the truth, and the man said, I don't want to even hear it. It doesn't matter to me. You will always be welcome in this village. You will always be welcome in my home. Took them in, had a party, had a huge celebration. And at the end of the festivities, when the evening was dying down, and the young men were finishing up their evening prayers, the 2 of them came to the one whose idea it was and stood over him. And he said, What? And they said, we're wondering, are you really a holy man? Did you keep this from us? Is there something that we don't know about you? And he was ashamed, and he said, "Please forgive me." He said, "We all did this together. We all lied together. We all deceived together. We all sinned together. But God's mercy and goodness was greater than our sin." And he said, in the presence of God, we are all pretenders. In the presence of God, we are all pretenders. And but we are not able to stifle God's holiness. I know. Isn't that a beautiful line? I have sat with that line for days. In the presence of God, we are all pretenders, but we cannot stifle God's holiness. And I think that's where we are in our Lenten journey. That is our prayer in this 5th week of Lent, this last official Sunday of Lent. Because next week, of course, is Palm Sunday, right? And then Easter. But this week, we ask ourselves, are we pretenders? Are we stifling God's holiness? Are we open to all of the goodness and mercy that God pours into our lives and into the world? And how do we live that? In the reading from the letter to the Philippians, Paul says, I have credentials, and he lists them all. And they're impressive. And anyone would want to be that, right? Anyone would want that list of credentials. Paul said, I was holy in the law. I followed the law. I did everything right. And yet I was stifling God's holiness. I was standing in the way of God's plan. I didn't even realize it, but I was messing things up. And so I've let it all go. I've let all of those credentials go. None of them are important to me anymore. I don't even care. They're like a loss to me. All I care about is knowing Jesus and his resurrection and knowing him through his suffering. And I'm going to keep on going. I'm going to run that race. In Greece at that time, they ran their races naked so that nothing would hold them back. He said, I'm going to run that race with my eye on the prize of knowing and loving Jesus. That's all that matters. And in Isaiah, the prophet tells us God is creating something new. God is making something new for us. We can't look back, or we won't find it. We can only look forward. And if we pay attention, if we're looking forward, we know, we can just see it starting. We can hear it just happening. And it's for us. It's for all of us who believe. It's for all of us who are open to this new thing. It's going to happen. If we're looking forward and heading toward that prize. So Thursday, about 100 people gathered for the Seder, the Freedom Seder, at the Unitarian Church in their basement, from 6 different congregations, almost 100 people. We broke that matzah, and we dipped the bitter herbs in the salt water, and we had gefilte fish. Yes, we did. We sang songs, and we read stories. Stories from all over the world. Stories of oppression and horror and hardship from all over the world. And when we got to the end, the message was this. God has shown us miracles are possible. God has shown us that miracles happen. God freed the people of Israel from Egypt. God parted the Red Sea. God gave them manna in the wilderness. God showed that miracles can happen. And now it's our turn to make those miracles happen. Now it's our turn to stand for justice and mercy and compassion. Now we're the ones who make that happen in the world, in all those places in the world that are so desperate for freedom, that are so oppressed and afraid. It's our job now. So are we pretenders? Are we pretenders? Are we stifling God's holiness in the work that we do, in the way that we live? Or are we ready to step into this new creation that God is making for us and for the world? Are we ready to work for that compassion and mercy and justice and freedom that God says is possible, that God has shown us is possible if we simply follow Jesus? Do we really have the love of Jesus Christ in our